Welcome to this Considered Opinions podcast.
I'm Dougal.
And I'm Celia. Thank you for joining us. There's been a lot of big changes on the global stage over the past week, and we thought this was a good chance to reflect on what it means and how we can approach these changes in this news while using some of the things that we've discussed in our podcasts in a more real-world application environment.
Yes. I mean, one of the first things which stands out for me is there's a real danger in catastrophizing. And those that have taken particular sides and have demonized people or alluded to things being a catastrophe if they don't turn out the way they want it to, what then happens when things don't turn out the way they want them to? Then it's the end of their world.
Well, this plays into resilience that we've talked about, and about it being mental resilience being the most important. Because if you don't have that mental resilience, then a little change of plan or something that doesn't work out as you want actually can feel like a catastrophe, and you don't know how to react and you don't know how to deal with it. And we see all sorts of crazy person behavior that happens, and that is a deep lack of mental resilience in people. That's how it plays out.
Do you think it also shows a lack of hope, that these people, unless certain things happen the way they want, all hope is gone?
Well, I think the lack of hope plays into the fact that we need to be very careful about the quality of the information that we are accessing and using. We've talked previously about it's not just quantity, it's quality, and taking time to process your information.
There's been some people that have got it spectacularly wrong. I mean, one of the ones which really jumps out for me is Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK. He's got himself in a real bind now. How does he deal with the US after he's been so rude and disrespectful?
It is one of those things where you kind of go, well, the quality of his information, I think people talk about, read the room.
Yes.
And that does play into quality of information. Not only there's an emotional intelligence there that's needed to understand what's going on for other people, but you need to have your ear to the ground. You need to know what is what's your echo chamber and what's quality information coming for you.
Yes, and if you don't do that, it really does limit how much you can learn and grow. And this is part of the reason why a lot of the establishment types simply have not been able to learn lessons. And we see it in multiple scenarios. We see it in the Netherlands and France as well, where some of the frictions that are boiling over there have been decades in the making.
The thing that always boggles my mind with that is there's, the old phrase, the definition of madness is doing the same thing and expecting a different result.
Yes.
And it seems like that keeps happening. They keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. And so I think it does really come down to this, who you're listening to.
Yes.
And the sort of information you're getting. And so, there are people who are completely surprised when things boil over or when an election result goes a different way than what they thought, because they're not really listening carefully enough. And I think listening is actually a hugely important thing. We need to be aware of what's going on.
And it's also a case of, there's an element of, even if you feel like you were right about, say recent elections or some of the things which are happening in Europe, you can still learn the wrong lessons from that and be arrogant about being right in this instance and therefore create a blind spot for something else. So it's a case of, take the win, but be gracious, because
Absolutely.
next time you might not be on the right side of picking it.
The thing about being gracious as well is that it does help to counteract the division, because if we're busy shouting we were right and you were wrong, then that just creates more division. But if there's a certain graciousness and a certain still a welcoming, let's work together and let's gather information that's going to be of quality and that actually is not divisive information.
You're trying to attract people in instead of, because one of the things is as soon as you're arrogant or you're saying I told you so, people's defensive walls go up and it stops them from learning. And what we really want is for people to come together and find common ground. And to do that, you need the victors in any election or any academic or intellectual debate to be gracious, so that helps or allows people to learn and maybe shift their position.
I think also that we have this big emphasis on winning or competition, and if we are, rather than trying to, with a competition you've always got to have a winner and a loser, but if you're trying to create a future that is going to be more inclusive and help people to be invested and enfranchised,
yes,
then you're going to be able to cross certain political divides.
Yes, yeah. Competition is not the ends, and as a young man, I fell into the trap of everything's competition and you gotta win, and you end up alienating people if you focus on that and make that your god. It means that one of the ways to express it is if you're expressing it in terms of a marriage, the example then is that if you're the winner, you're married to a loser. But it can be applied to life as well, that whether it be at an election or at a debate at your place of work, if you're winning and it's a zero-sum game, then the other person loses, and that then alienates them.
Yeah, it breaks down relationships rather than building up relationships.
Yeah.
And the building up of relationships, actually, when you magnify that, that's a building up of community. And when you magnify that, that's a building up of society and culture.
Yes. And which means that, again, coming back to that grace, there's an element of just take the win. Try not to think, oh, well, what about this problem? What about that problem? Or what about retribution? It's that can really come back to bite you potentially in the future.
Yes. The other thing is when you take the win, you are looking forward with hope, but at the same time, it's not misplaced optimism that anything is going to be a silver bullet or a saving grace and everything's going to be fine from here on out because things are going your way.
Yes.
It's not that. It's a case of there's always going to be ebb and flow, the ups and downs. Some things you're going to agree with, some things that you're not. But it's about what's going on mentally for us. And when we live with hope, we have a better future ahead of us.
Yes. One other sort of thing, it's sort of associated with the dangers of catastrophizing, but it's more centered around the need for truth or the dangers of having poor information. And I think especially around the elections in the US, it really stands out like a sore thumb that if you follow particular stories or particular narratives that aren't entirely truthful, and the stories that you tell yourself aren't entirely truthful, you're kind of setting yourself up for disappointment. And then on top of that, you add the catastrophizing, and it becomes quite a toxic mix. So it's a reminder that we need to be truthful to ourselves, and we need to be honest with ourselves about what's really going on.
Honesty is really, I think, where it's at, because there's a lot of people who are very shocked by things that are happening, not just in the American elections, but the things that are going on in
whether it be Germany, collapse of the government, UK, they've got demonstrations and issues over Remembrance Day. Netherlands, France, Spain have big demonstrations, riots, protests.
So if people are very shocked by things not turning out as they expect, then I think we do need to look at the quality of our information.
Yeah, well, the example in Spain's an interesting one because there the officials spent a long time over the last year removing a lot of dams for rewilding of the rivers. But what they didn't consider was why were those dams put there in the first place. And basically they removed all of their flood mitigation measures. And it's an old adage of G.K. Chesterton's. If you're going to knock down the wall, first consider why the wall was put there in the first place.
So we've really got an opportunity here to look at how we are reacting to things, how we're thinking about things, and to practice some of these ideas that we have been talking about.
How do you be hopeful? How do you practice wisdom? We haven't discussed yet love and faith, but or trust? How do you build love and trust into the way that you approach or react to that which is going on around you? Taking courage. How do you behave in a just manner? All of these concepts, these virtues, have implications for how we react day to day, whether it be in the big scale, there's been a lot of big scale things happening in the last week, or whether we're talking about in our own personal lives, work, community, family. How do we respond to things that are happening in our lives? Thank you for joining us for this Considered Opinions podcast. We look forward to seeing you again next time, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.